All right, hashtag randomly with Ronnie Jr. Today we're going to talk to a pop culture expert and everything else. And she's a mother. I could never imagine doing a show, being so productive and busy, and being a mother. Like, I feel like, when do you sleep? But we'll find out all that stuff. We got Kate Casey from the podcast Reality Life. Kate, welcome to the show today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
When I first heard of your podcast, I assumed almost that it was just reality TV, but the reality is it's a lot more than that. How do you mix doing those different styles? Because reality is so fun, it's so fluffy. But then I was looking at your show and I was like, oh my gosh, she does heavy hitting stuff, things that are hard to talk about, et cetera, et cetera. How do you mix all that together?
Well, when I pitched the show almost 7 years ago, it was just about reality TV. And the executive at the podcast network asked me, do enough people watch reality shows, if you can imagine that? So I structured the show kind of like a talk show where I had an opening and I had two guests. The front end, I'd have an interview with somebody who was on a reality show. And then the second part of the episode would be somebody reviewing a show, and then a closing. And I just found that over time, that really unscripted television, the umbrella, was expanding, and that the people who, like myself, watch reality shows also love documentaries because they like real stories about real people. So the show has expanded over 7 years. And I find still to this day that if I talk to somebody who loves 90 Day Fiance or The Bachelor or The Real Housewives or Vanderpump Rules, they're probably watching documentaries also.
So everything kind of mixes together. Now, this is crazy.
It's really just real people, real stories. That's the difference between, a scripted show is these are real people's lives. Now, lots of people will say a lot of these reality shows are scripted. They're not. It's still a real person who was chosen because of their odd picadillos or over-the-top personality. But these are their real life stories versus somebody that was scripted by a writer.
That is true. It's at the end of the day, it's a little bit like the human experience. It's just different ways that we receive it. But what's very incredible, and you said 7 years, you have upwards towards 644 episodes. Like, I can't imagine being that consistent, which of course I will. And as we grow, and I started radio 20 years ago, but like just that fact, 644 episodes. Do you have anything you could share in terms of like what it takes to be that consistent? And again, being a busy mother, being a personality, how do you like balance it all?
Well, I make tons of sacrifices. I don't really have the time to do some things that I'd love to do, like go on vacations or spend time with friends, because I knew then and I know now that the way that you keep your audience engaged is with consistent episodes, because it's so much a part of their day. And I don't want to let people down, especially if it's something they listen to on their commute or on their walks, or maybe they're going through cancer treatments, or they just need a familiar, constant voice. So I've just made a lot of sacrifices to make that possible. You had asked, how do I sleep at night? I probably only sleep about 5.5 hours, five and a half hours a day.
The way you said it, how could you sleep at night? Not like how could you sleep at night in terms of anything bad, but yes. Yeah. When do you sleep? 5.5 hours. Okay. So you get your beauty sleep. So that's good. Let's get into one pop culture thing that I just wanted to know what you thought. And then I do have another question for you. I wanted to know, how did you end up here? Some people stumble into this, broadcast space. Some people, it's like what they wanted to do since they were a child. I want to know your route. But before we do that, I have to switch up gears. I need to know what you think about Danielle and Lindsay on Summer House. This is a friendship on one of my favorite reality shows. Lindsay was on the first season. I think Danielle sort of came in second season. She was more of a quote unquote friend of, but she's been so prominent on the series. They are now having a friendship break. What is your thought on this? And how do you think Summer House is holding up in terms of everybody loves Vanderpump right now, but Summer House sort of gets the shaft? What are your thoughts on all that?
I think the Summer House's problem is they don't have the friendship dynamics, the authentic friendship dynamics that Vanderpump Rules has had and still has. I think that in the beginning of Summer House, you had people that were friends off of a television show. And over time, many of them have left the show and they hire new people, and that makes it less authentic. I also think that the showrunner has to do a very good job of reminding them that they're all a team and certain people bring certain things to the show. There's going to be somebody who brings out difficult conversations, somebody who's the heartstone, whom people feel comfortable coming to and talking to about problems. Each person, it represents an archetype. And you need a showrunner that sort of massages their shoulders in terms of, we're all a part of a team. You all bring something new to the show, and it makes it more cohesive, and then the relationships are sustained. But if you don't do that, the environment becomes very toxic, and they become more like coworkers. And the truth is, most of the fights that happen on shows like that have to do with things that are happening off camera. So is somebody getting paid more than I do? Do they get more camera time? Do they get more in brand deals? Are they invited back to watch what happens live more often? Do they have more followers? All of those things start to cloud the relationships, and it takes an extraordinary team behind the scenes to help mitigate the toxicity. And it also takes people who are part of the cast and understand that this moment in time is fleeting. But I think a lot of reality stars become so engulfed by the fame and the opportunities that they get, that they lose sight of who they are, and that this is a very short window of time. They start to believe that they completely should shed all of their previous life because now they're a TV personality. Whereas I think the most successful people realize being on a TV show is a small part of my very other full life. And I think the people that throw that away and make the television show the center of their life don't have the longevity.
In terms of these two, who I like them both, I struggle with, it's always easy when you watch two cast members who are having a difference of opinion, but you kind of side with one. I love Lindsay. I think she was born to do reality TV and other stuff. And I just think Danielle brings such an authenticity. Do you have a side when you see them arguing? Or
no, I mean, I usually don't. I mean, very rarely will I. No, that's not true. Some people, like, you know, Louis, Teresa's husband, I'm never going to be on his team. But I think that Lindsay and Danielle represent a lot of people's friendships, where you start to outgrow somebody, or when someone's in a more serious relationship, you're spending more time with them and your relationship changes. The problem with their friendship is that they were both friends with Carl, who obviously we know Lindsay's engaged to now. There's not really a space for a third person if the couple's getting married. So you have that, and then you have the complications of the show. And last summer, Danielle was doing deals with Lindsay for TJ Maxx, and now Carl's doing it. You know, one person's in a relationship that's together. One part of the couple broke. You know, the other person broke up with their partner. I think ultimately they can become friends again if they have a very real conversation about how they both changed because of the show and where their value systems align.
I do feel like, yes, they're going to find a way to get back. It's just a complicated nature between filming the show and then like that whole, you know.
I don't think they can be friends until they're off the show.
Like completely leave the show, or do you mean like off season?
Like when they're not doing the show anymore. It might have to happen 3 or 4 years from now. But I think that being on the show complicates things too much.
You think it got that bad between them? Wow.
I just think it happens because of the toxicity of being on a reality show. I mean, you have to have a very strong sense of self in order to be successful in this space. And I always say, like, sometimes people, it's almost like they're compromised in the way, like, you go through airport security. When somebody goes on a reality show, they get compromised by fame. It's like they go through the first season and then they come out a different person. And it takes a really strong person to maintain those friendships. And just, you know, I think that Paige and Hannah Berner have done a very good job of really keeping in mind that their friendship's more important than all the ancillary opportunities that come with being a famous person. They've really maintained a great friendship. But then, of course, Hannah's not on the show anymore.
I like that concept. The only thing is I don't enjoy Paige or didn't enjoy Hannah on the show. That's what the struggle is. I'm like, oh man, like I'm not saying Lindsay or Danielle, it's either their faults. Like you made a good point. It's all about where they were going in their lives. You know, now that Lindsay's in this serious relationship with somebody who did decide to stop drinking because the brother passed away.
Well, also Danielle was hooking up with Carl at some point. That's another complicated part of it.
Yeah.
So if you think like, I think people are kind of, they seem, I think that people need to step away and realize we've all had a friendship like this in some way. You know, like a lot of your friends in college, like, you know, it's basically like friends in college and two of the friends fall in love with each other. It changes the dynamics.
The dynamic has definitely changed. All right. Well,
one person's ready to get married and one person's ready to have kids. And then Danielle's like, are you really taking this seriously? Because this is Carl. She's probably thinking, I've been privy to conversations about what you want in a partner, and is this the right person for you? And she's saying that out of love, not out of, you know, with any agenda. I think she's authentically been like, I've talked to you for 10 years about the person that you want to be with, or however long that might be. And sometimes people don't want to hear that when they're in a really happy place and they're excited about this next part of their life journey. But I think that only in time will you go back and say, you know what, you're right. You had my best interest, but it was all clouded because they're on a reality show.
Just since we're in the topic, and then we'll get back to you, I have struggled with enjoying Paige. And so I'm always like, Paige is, you know, you made a great point about her friendship with Hannah. Do you think Paige was good for the show? And do you think she's great? Like because
I think that you have to look at, I always look at a show like, what's the story that they're telling? And she represents an archetype in New York City. She's in the fashion influencer space. She's got that dry, cutting sense of humor, which I grew up with and I really enjoy. She kind of, her role on the show is just to be like a narrator sometimes. She's the person that kind of gives you a moment where she explains in a very funny joke, like what the truth behind something. So I think people sometimes get wrapped up in, oh, she reminds me of that friend I had who I couldn't stand from The Office or whatever. But if you look back and sit and look at something like, what is the story they're trying to tell about a show? I think she fits an archetype. And for that reason, I think she's great.
Well, then I will try, I will look, I will sit back, because I have had such a struggle with Paige, like from the beginning, and she's very successful. You know, she's been on different franchises in terms of, not franchises, but, you know, the Southern Charm and the Winter House. I just have not connected to her for some reason. Maybe it was just also my love for like Lindsay. Day one, she just sort of jumped off the page. I loved her. Danielle immediately, and Paige just never. So just
just like look at, if you were to stand back and think of like, with a producer hat, like of all the archetypes, Gabby represents somebody whose family kind of spoiled them. And that sometimes it's hard in friendships when you're in that age span where you're hustling, but you're in a friend group with somebody who gets to use their parents' credit card bills. That's great storytelling about how those two people who have completely different mindsets and life experiences cohabitate. So I look at it that way, like, oh, that's interesting. I want to see how that unravels. And it's not like, I'm not watching it like, God, fuck her. But she gets, she gets to like, not worry about bills.
Yeah.
I try to look at it that way because I'm always looking at stuff like from a producer hat.
Okay, like how it meshes together and how that would make you feel.
Why is this an interesting show?
It does make you wonder like how they received Gabby. I gotta say, I love Gabby from day one. I think this batch of newbies, Sam was the one I warmed up to the slowest. I think this batch of newbies is actually the most interesting in quite some time.
You know why,
Summer House and Winter House.
You know why I think that's happening to you? Because there's not a lot of storytelling from Sam. We don't really still know who she is, the way she looks at the world, what life experiences allows us to see how she looks at the world. All we've learned is she's close to her mom. She's hypersexual. That's it. Like there are not enough layers there yet. And I think that's sometimes the frustration of the viewers. Like, well, like get Chris out of here. I think that sometimes there's a conflict between the patience of the viewer and the story that the producers are trying to tell and should tell.
Yeah. Well, I'll say Gabby and Chris, my opinion, I think they do work with the show. So I'd love to see them get a second season. Will it happen? I guess we just got to wait. Let's talk about you though. So I get so fascinated because for me, it's just so funny that the whole world went digital or whatever the case. But for me, I was always, as a kid, I was the kid with the toilet paper wrapper, and I'd like look in the mirror and I'd go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'd pretend like I was on, a TV show like a TRL or Johnny Carson or something. So I get fascinated that there's a handful of me's that like this is what we loved. Then I get fascinated. There's other people who literally are just so talented. Their minds are so swift and they just fell into the space. I was just wondering where you were at with that.
I always wanted a career in journalism. I love politics and I also love comedy. I feel like I'm a lucky person because I've been able to have opportunities in all those spaces. For a very long time, I did crisis media litigation for global law firms. And you're like, what the hell does that mean? I would create media opportunities for lawyers. So I was always interviewing people, talking to the media, spending time with clients, figuring out where I could place them in the news. So I was like constantly keeping up with the news in a corporate world, but I also loved pop culture. So it's just enmeshed in reading things all day long and interviewing people. So when the concept for my show really was derived from my obsession with reality shows, because to me, watching a reality show is like unraveling who a person is. And social dynamics, I kind of think of myself as a cultural anthropologist. So beginning the show and interviewing people just seemed like a natural progression from working in media litigation and working in PR. Because basically, I feel like I'm somebody who's always interviewing somebody. If I go to a dinner party, I want to know everything about you. I want to know, where you grew up, what school you went to, what your parents are like, who your friends are, your favorite book, what you like to do on the weekends. And so I look at every show I watch as I'm kind of unraveling who that person is. And when I get a chance to interview somebody, I want to figure out why they created a show or the biggest hurdles in making it and what they realized when they came out of it. So I've always felt like I've interviewing people anyway and researching. And I realized that there was a hole in the space. No one was really interviewing reality stars. Watch What Crappens would kind of recap a reality show. And sometimes Heather McDonald would have like her favorite housewife on, but her show was really about juicy stories. But I didn't see anybody who was focused solely on who are the people that go on reality shows, how does it forever change their life? And then, of course, I expanded interviewing people on documentaries too. So while it wouldn't make sense to somebody if they just saw I worked in media relations and then I started a podcast, I think that once you get to know me and listen to my show, it kind of all makes sense. Ultimately, I think it goes back to me being like a cultural anthropologist.
I love the word cultural anthropologist. Yes. And that's what we're doing. We're always interviewing people at dinner parties. We're doing it. Dating, we're doing it. It always kind of comes up.
I think what's different about me too is I'm making the person I interview the center. I'm illuminating their personal story, where I think other people, they're the talent. The person interviewed,
they're trying to get a clickbait moment. Yeah.
They're the center of it. They're the story. I really try to make the person I'm interviewing be illuminated.
Well, let's illuminate you today. Going off that though, what's interesting is I worked on a show called American Latino TV, and on occasion we'd pitch everybody, but on occasion I would say, can we bring in a reality star from like VH1? Now I remember trying to pitch it to my team, my bosses that I worked for, and they would always look at it as like, oh, that's like a VH1 love and hip hop show. And I said, yes, you are right. Yes. However, let me bring them in. And I specifically, that comes to mind is like a Evelyn Lozada. She's currently on the Peacock streaming. She was lovely. She was lovely, of course. And I always say, let me bring them in. And our show was 4-minute vignettes. So of course I interviewed them for an hour, as I do. But where I'd always find that, I think this is what you're saying, similar fascination with how much story could I get out of them? Like, do we even know, like, did they go into reality because they were thirsty? Did they go into it because they, they needed validation from their father? I mean,
or the impact, like Irene from Real World season in Los
Seattle.
Angeles.
The cop. Yes.
She was the cop. Like, okay, when you went on the show, you were exposing your job and yourself in a way that I don't think other Hispanic women had really been able to do. And how did that forever change your life? And did you find that it made your job difficult after being recognized on television? So that's kind of the way I'm always thinking too.
That I'm very much fascinated by, specifically because remember when, I think his name was Alvin is his character on the Cosby Show, when everyone gave him a big to-do about, you were on this hit show, but now you're at Trader Joe's, helping people with the checkout. Like something about being in that public eye and then leaving it, like it, as you said, it forever changes your life. I love that. Well, this is why we love the show. Let's do what were the things that made you sort of come alive in the pop culture space in the 80s? And then I'll move on to the 90s. And I'm not like assessing your age, but I'm just, let's talk.
I was little then, but I just loved television. I loved television. I loved watching TV. I loved people's stories. It was sort of an escape. I had a very difficult childhood. My family home was just very sad and serious. And it was a great escape for me. And I just was really interested in different people and the way they look at life. I also have a photographic memory and I can remember details about people. So if I watched something, whether it was Entertainment Tonight or I read something in a magazine or I overheard a conversation, I would remember the celebrity, the names of their children, details about them that would seem absurdly stupid to other people.
Where do you think that comes from? Like, why did you latch onto the details?
I just think it's the way my brain works. And it's interesting because it took me a long time to understand other people are not like that. It's almost like my brain's moving fast and it's like a hamster wheel and I'm taking all the information and the wheel keeps going. And I'm sort of surprised when other people don't remember all the details about somebody. It's just the way I am.
That's interesting. Now you're just having me go through my brain because I'm like, oh, I remember a lot, but I'm also trying to assess like what is it? Like, what was my thing? I'll get back to you on that.
I do think everybody has their own little interesting picadillo. But for me, I felt like when I was a kid, I tried to like withhold it because I felt like it made people uncomfortable. And then when I went to college, I realized that President Clinton had a similar thing that I did because I would read about how he was such a great campaigner and he would remember details about people. So if he saw you and he would say, how's your Aunt Vera? And do you guys still live on Walnut Street? And did your, aunt get the surgery on her knee? And people were like, whoa, but that's how my brain works.
Right.
And so sometimes it can be like upsetting to people. And the great thing about the job that I have is it really helps me out so much. So when I'm interviewing somebody, I can remember all the things that I saw in, season 2 and bring stuff up. And I think it makes people feel great because I feel like everybody has a personal story, but most importantly, everyone wants to feel like they matter. And remembering details makes someone feel like you paid attention to them.
It's true. Like when people use your name back in the sentence, when they recall these stories, it's like, you just are around so many people that don't do that. And almost it's especially worse now because we're in a digital media, quote unquote, low attention span moment that no one's really latching on to like, what's your story? It's very surface. So that's actually a big deal. Let's go into the 90s. Cause I think of like the 90s as such, I was a teenager. And what's interesting in pop culture, in my opinion, is I latched onto it in a way that I saw like all of these elements that like, oh, I want to go there. Like, and to your point of like remembering things. And I don't know if this is similar to you in any way, but for me, it was like when I would see the biggest moment, and you could share me some of your 90s moments for me was Janet Jackson's If music video behind the music or behind the video actually with Bill Bellamy as the host. And it took years later to realize what that was. It was me saying, this is sort of all the elements coming together. This is Janet, of course, who doesn't love Janet? it's the artistry. It's like, wow, you could have a job, you know, making television or making music videos. It was Bill Bellamy in the regards of, oh, okay, like he is a host, like that is a job, like that's like here I'm coming, you know, I'm a kid that grew up in Southern California, and it's all about like Little League, and I could care less about Little League. And the last part is, as a, you know, at the time, of course, you don't know, but as I grew up, you know, I'm a gay guy, and it's like you start seeing different elements of that music video. So when I think of remembering things, it's because I want to touch a thing that I necessarily don't have in my current teenage 90s life, and I see it there. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. So did you have any element like that too when you think of the 90s?
Comedy. Like I love Bill Bellamy because he was such a funny host. I thought MTV had great hosts. They had great shows. Some of their like comedy shows were so funny. I was a huge Saturday Night Live fan and still am. Comedy just really was so fascinating, and I just felt like I have to have a piece of that in some way. I also love John Hughes movies. I thought he was such a great storyteller. He made a lot of the quintessential movies of the 80s and the 90s. I wouldn't say it was, I mean, I have working knowledge of a lot of music. I wouldn't say it was like the thing that I really loved that much. You know, I was thinking though, remember the music video with Janet Jackson and her brother, Michael? And it was
Scream, yeah.
The one in black and white. It's wild because now you look at it, it's like not even that big of a deal because so many people on TikTok make these really curated videos. It's kind of wild. It's not that big of a deal anymore. When it first came out, people were like the artistry behind that. And now I just feel like the lay person can make such a wildly creative thing just with their iPhone.
That was one thing I was actually going to bring up with you. I was going to state how people of today that are very much in the TikTok space or Twitter or Instagram, they don't really get the concept that like there was a time where MTV moved so much of everything. Looking back, I was thinking of like music videos, but of course MTV award shows, how it was such must-see TV. But it seems like that's all gone now. But it's unfathomable as to why no one cares about that stuff anymore. But I really feel like those were great memories. I feel like I never missed an MTV Music Awards, and now people don't care at all.
Well, I don't think people care about awards at all. I don't think people care about the Oscars. I just think it's because your phone's much more interesting. I think those shows are way too long. People are far more interested in short segments of entertainment. And they like podcasts because they can multitask. And I just think the award shows are a thing of the past.
Even in the regards of,
and also, you know, that so many of them are just so political. The People's Choice Awards, like it's so people know beforehand if they won, and it doesn't. I think when we were younger, we had our concept of fairness was a lot different than now. What we think is fair. I don't think those award shows are always fair.
So like
look at podcast awards. Podcast awards are so absurdly unfair and ridiculous. I'm like, what is that show? And it's all
right. Nonsense. Whenever it's the iHeart Awards, it's always like, oh wow, how funny that all the iHeart podcasts happen to win or whatever. Yeah, I was talking on the radio at 94.7 in New York City with Miss Jones, and we were talking about Complex Magazine had a top 25 hip hop media, like most influential in that space, and all of them. Not all of them, but there were a handful of them that came through Complex at one stage and then like evolved. It was like, there's that bias that's definitely there. So that's interesting. It's interesting because I used to love award shows. They used to be must-see TV. They were fun.
Oh, I would have it like the Oscars, like the charcuterie board and all like excited. I was ready to be on Twitter, and I just don't think they're relevant anymore.
So question to you. This is just off the top here. Are you a binge watcher, or do you love the like HBO rolling out Succession by the week? What kind of feeds you more?
Well, I'm kind of the wrong person to ask because I get screeners, so I can watch all the episodes up ahead of time. So I think I'm too spoiled now. I remember watching Murder on Middle Beach and being frustrated. I have to wait another week for another episode, and now I'm spoiled. I get to see it all.
Gotcha. Okay, so I want to do just one little 90s thing that I just want to know your who would you rather kind of a deal. So were you much more of a 90210 girl or a Melrose Place, or not at all? You have choices here.
I mean, I kind of like them both. I think they just told totally different stories. I think I couldn't choose one or the other. I thought they were independently great shows.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like I still got a couple Melrose Places in me that I got to go back and like rewatch because I watched them so young, and it's like probably a different experience now that you're an adult.
Well, I think it would be very hard to watch it now because they seem like probably overacting.
Oh, but that's okay.
A lot of the scenes are probably absurd. Like Marsha, like
oh yeah, with the
losing
hair.
her hair.
Yeah,
I mean, like a lot of that, we would be like, okay.
yeah, it would be bad, but
And also, quite
maybe
frankly, how could they afford those apartments? You know, most people in LA that are that young cannot afford an apartment like that.
That's true. They were all sort of trying to make their
And
way in the
also, a
world.
90210, they had a DJ in the high school. Give me a break.
Yeah. 90210, I know I followed it. I followed it from the beginning, and I didn't have a problem with it at the end either. Like I liked where it went. I love Vanessa Marcel. Yeah, these are very classic shows. Absolutely. Talking about Housewives and just the impact that it's had, what do you think in terms of housewives that have went on and created a big success, like the vein of Bethany Frankel? What does it take in this day and age to be successful and not let reality TV mess with your mind, but more so use it to your career landscape?
I think Bethany Frankel has an enormous success because she had her own success before the show. The show was really just a small part of who she was, and I think continues to be. I think that she had a very full life with friends and work experience and professional accolades and colleagues and relationships. And I think that the problem with a lot of housewives is this is their vehicle to maybe gain their own independence, and they didn't have a professional background. And then suddenly they're confronted on camera with their husband's a terrible person. And then they're trying to reinvent themselves while the show's being filmed. And so they weren't really sure of who they were when they started. And then they're spit out of this tornado. So I think the ones that are most successful have lived a very full life before they joined the show. The show will not make or break them. It's a very small part of their life. The smartest ones use it as an opportunity to launch something else. And I think Bethany is the greatest example of that.
Do you think they really significantly struggle with that void of not having cameras around?
Yeah, I do. And I've interviewed a lot of people that talk about it. I think one of the greatest interviews you can listen to if you're thinking about that is the interview I did with Bronwyn, who I knew personally before she was on the show. And she said, I got to be honest with you. I feel like I'm addicted to fame. This is just another addiction of mine. And I feel like my life's over. And I say in the interview, I'm not going to allow you to have that. You had a full life before this show and you're going to have one after. This is not the be all end all, but not everybody has a friend who will kind of keep it straight. I think that a lot of housewives encircle themselves with sycophants who tell them you are a queen, you're a legend, you're an icon, you're all of these things. And they're not being honest. You've turned into a monster. You're completely diabolical. You're now delusional. You only care about people who praise you. You're not living on planet Earth. You're not being mindful of your money. You're not being mindful of the people that you have that you now only seemingly use because it'll get you more followers or more opportunities. You have to have people in your life who keep your feet firmly planted on the ground.
It's funny because you mentioned the people who were strong, or not strong, but had a full life prior. But even them, I feel like Dorinda Medley probably had a really full life. It sounds like she did, but it does also seem like she is just waiting and, waiting by the phone and wants to be back in that reality TV thing so badly. That void.
I think she had a pretty full life before. I think what the problem is that I was just thinking about this earlier this morning. I think that the death of her husband, Richard, really threw her for a loop. And I think that she began the show when she was in a compromised period of time, very vulnerable. And I think that she had a minute, which I think a lot of widows probably feel like, okay, where am I going next?
once you get spit out of the machine. Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
that's interesting.
I think maybe her experience would be different if she had had more time. I think I have enormous empathy for her for that reason.
That's really interesting because switching gears just a bit, Ariana went into that Tom Sandoval relationship right after her father passed. So it's so odd that, like, just in the back of my head, the first thing I thought of is, of course, Team Ariana, all that stuff. But then the first thing I thought of is like, wow, she started this experience. I don't even think she was in LA that long. She was living in New York before. And like, I just think of like what that looks like that thing that gave her a relationship, gave her a TV show, and gave her money. And I don't mean that in an Ariana shallow way by any means, but when it gets spit out, and it's not spit out because she, of course, is still on the show. In fact, she's the star of the show now. But like, what does that feel like to, like, get the Dorinda experience, Now, one thing is interesting though. Kate does a good job. She's got Ronnie thinking. The one thing about Dorinda is like what made her so good is that she was willing to come on the show while not complete, while just getting the her husband passing. But it's also the thing that when the show's over, it must be dark and quiet, like really, really eerie, actually.
Yeah, I think again it goes back to, I think they need a period of time to sort of rid themselves of the people that fed them information that wasn't helpful. Like, you need to be an over the top version of yourself because that's what the audience wants. But then I also feel like this experience as a housewife should be telling the real story of a woman, and a woman who is a widow or who's a housewife, or like a true one, raising children, of a professional, of like all these things that make us such complicated and interesting people. And if you don't have people that are reminding you, that maybe the producers, the showrunner, the makeup people, your husband, your children, your friends, if you don't have enough people saying you must remain true to who you are, it would be very easy to allow yourself to become a different version of yourself. I don't know. I think that one of the best scenes in Housewives of New York in history was the moment that Dorinda and Carol are sitting in that London hotel talking about what it's like to lose a spouse. And I think about things that they said all the time. And that was a real moment because she's in a moment of pain. She's in this weird period of her life, to your point. But I also think that because she was mourning, that she may have been vulnerable to relationships or conversations that didn't have her best interest at heart.
Wait, say that part again.
I think because she was in a vulnerable space, because her husband had passed and she was mourning it, that she may have been vulnerable to people who were encouraging her to do things or do things that were not the true version of herself. Like, I just think there are too many people sometimes, once people become famous and they want to attach themselves. Carlos King and I talk about this all the time. They attach themselves to housewives because they want to be part of this fame train. They want to, maybe their own personal needs are like they want followers, or they want to be the first person that is the scoop, but they don't always have their best interest at heart. I think that the early days of Housewives were better for that reason, because you had less followers and you had less entourages given access to Housewives. So they were still in that space where they're living their lives out loud on camera.
Well, you see that in RuPaul's Drag Race also. The earlier seasons were so authentic. There wasn't this like, how am I going to play, on television after this? What is this going to look like with my Twitter followers, my merch? There's a thing called DragCon now. Well, there's obviously BravoCon too. All of those elements start getting put in people's minds and you stop telling the real story. The thing that attracted me to you originally was that one time you did a show with Carlos King and you guys were talking about Real Housewives of Miami. I was, of course, recapping it and, of course, gushing over everybody. But it was so intriguing to me because, sometimes you could only look through your lens, or often you look through your own lens. I completely forgot. And I feel almost bad because I was like, Julia's a little bit boring. I was given like a harsh opinion or whatever the case. And then I try to listen to tons of podcasts and watch a lot of YouTube and stuff like that. I love to see everyone winning. And you were like so taken or touched by like, oh my gosh, I will at one point have to be faced with my own. What was it? Julia had an issue with
Her
empty
daughters.
nest.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the way
but that's an important story to tell about a woman who's a mother. At some point, your children are going to leave your house, and you have a complete identity crisis. Does someone need me? The house is quiet. I'm not helping anybody. Who am I now? Now I have to be a completely different version of the person that I have been the last 18 years because a lot of mothers get tied up in their children's activities and their identities get tied to their children. I just thought that was a really honest story. I also think Julia is important because ultimately every city is telling the story of the women in it. And I interviewed Billy Corbin, who is a Miami-based documentary filmmaker, and he said, the truth is that Miami is a very homophobic city. And it's really difficult to be a lesbian, like a lesbian in this city. And she's also married to somebody who's very famous. And I think that those stories are really important. And I think that the truth is Housewives has been an incredible vehicle for storytelling because someone in another pocket of the world, even in the country, may has never met a lesbian. They don't know anybody who's gay. They don't know anybody who's trans. They don't know any, that's not their life. And suddenly they see someone else's story and then they warm up to them and they see themselves in that person. And then they're like, they consider Julia as their friend. And so that when somebody has a conversation around them and that's homophobic, it's like, actually, you're wrong. And here's why. It actually really does a great job of shifting people's mindsets, opening you to other people's life experiences, which ultimately helps you evolve as well. So I think that people sometimes get caught up in the, who's a villain and the fights. But I don't think we can lose sight of the fact that The Real Housewives has done an incredible job telling the story of women between, 30 and 55 years old who were for many decades completely erased from television and not important, and all of their individual stories and then their way that their lives intersect has been really helpful for expanding people's worldviews.
There's definitely agreeing with you that there's value in Julia. Of course, we always love Martina on the show, but that was just something that I was so taken with when you stated it the way you stated it, that like empty nest, that like I don't have that even in, like, I don't even think of that.
But and if you watched a show that was only like Survivor at a dinner table where they're just fighting about really surface level stuff, it would get boring. But if you're watching a show and you're like, okay, Nicole and her Cuban father have been struggling and unraveling, like, what is their culture like? What is the role of a father in the Cuban culture? Does it shape things because she has her own independence and she became this professional and now she doesn't need him? And what were the dynamics of her parents' marriage? Mm-hmm. All those stories are so interesting and important. And I don't know, is that story being told? Or Alexia's story, like she was married to like a cocaine kingpin, really, and has these two children, and one of them's in a car accident, and now she's the mother of a child that's going to need an enormous amount of help, and also letting go and getting him into a program where, like that moment where he said, Frankie was asked, have you ever taken an Uber? And he's like, oh, no. He said he was scared, yeah. You feel the weight of Frankie, but also of Alexia. And I think that a lot of women and probably fathers who have a special needs child felt seen.
Yeah, it took me to such a place, like, one of my dearest friends, such a go-getter. He has a special needs brother, of a certain level. And I, when we sometimes talk about like, just dreams and stuff, I'll be like, oh, am I moving back to LA? Am I going back to New York? Like, I feel very not lucky. I don't want to say it like that, but I can do whatever I want. And I'm thinking about this dear friend of mine. he can't make that decision because he has to be close to wherever the brother is, which of course the brother stays with the mother at this point. But it's just, you're right. That's the thing about Housewives. I love it when they could, the drama is fun, but I feel like you need to have the peaks and valleys for it to be a really good show. You can't just have them jump in together and go for it.
But also when they're fighting, you're like, if they have a really substantial story behind it, you understand that fight, like you're more invested in them resolving or actually spitting out what's really at the heart of something. But you can't do that if you don't build up their individual stories first.
Totally agree. And Miami Housewives is a very good watch, so go watch it.
Yeah.
And I love Larsa. Just let me be. But let me.
I like Larsa too. I think she tells that's a really interesting story. She does represent like a woman of that economic level who was the woman behind a really popular figure. And then she goes through this divorce and her children are all, kind of building their own independence. And like, who is she? Like, how does she build her own name? And the fact that she's dating Michael Jordan's son adds another interesting layer, given that she was married to Scottie Pippen. I love, like, I can't, that's why it's hard for me to, there are very few people I'm like, I cannot stand them. I don't want to watch them. I'm not interested. Vicky Gumbelson, I'm not interested. I never want to hear her story. I don't care. But I always find all of their stories very interesting.
Let's go finish Housewives here and finish the episode here. Two last things. One comment is, yes, I totally agree that as much empathy as I could have. I mean, I'm a man, so it is a little bit different, but like, for women not to have that much exposure on television at a certain age, I do feel like that is what drew me to like a Dorinda character, just because she dressed, not that there's an age appropriateness about how you're supposed to dress, but she dressed in a certain way. And I always kind of feel like sometimes I don't like watching the shows and like Twitter will react to one of the younger housewives. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I'm always like, of course, the 32-year-old skin is taut. Of course, she's in her first marriage. Of course, I'm not being funny here. I'm just saying I hate when they compare somebody who's lived a longer life. And, we have to be honest, when the longer we're here, and thankfully to be here, more baggage we carry. And Dorinda,
I wonder, I would love to know though. I would love someone to do like a Twitter heavy research. Who are the people actually commenting on the looks? Is it really the men that are watching? Because I don't find that other women would ever compare a 55-year-old woman who's already had a child and has been through major life experiences to a new mother who is 33. We wouldn't do that. It would be absurd.
Well, anyway, we break it down. Dorinda, I just think she is gorgeous. I just think she is. And I do love to see that representation on television because it's just not there. It's sad, and what do you think can be done about that aspect? The fact that women on television and film and stuff are, much more skewed younger. What is your thoughts on that?
I think it has to do with needing more women in positions of power in the entertainment industry. Because we want to watch women of all ages. We want to watch female stories of every race, every religion. That's what we want to watch. That's why we watch The Housewives, because we get to see that. But unless you have women in positions of power, you won't see that. So I think people that have the ability to make those calls and to hire showrunners and producers and network executives, it's in their best interest to hire women because we know what a female audience wants.
That's right. I agree with it. Last thing here, when we talk about Housewives and it being utilized as a platform, and we talked about Bethany Frankel a second ago, who do you think is doing it right? Who is out there using the platform, maintaining, the best sense of self, even though it's, tons of bells and whistles? Who's doing it right now?
I think Kandi Burruss does a fantastic job. I think she went into the show as somebody who had her own professional successes, very confident in herself, willing to crack herself open to expose you to her children and to her mother and to her aunts, talk about some of the failures that she's had while building her business. I think that she's certainly created fantastic ancillary businesses out of the Housewives. And I think she's just done a really good job of being a great example of a working mom.
Mm-hmm. Kandi, she gets that money, that's for sure. I also love Kenya on the show. Those two, I don't have a favorite because I don't want to put them against each other. But Kenya, I just love Kenya.
My favorite part about Kenya is that I think the way that she's been open about her mother abandoning her makes a ton of viewers feel seen.
That she had
because
a child
also she's the way she's talking about becoming a mother now, and how when that happens to you as a little girl and then you become a mother, it's almost like you're confronted by the things that you lacked while trying to give your child the things that you want for them. It can be as much as you are, it's like you're enjoying being a mother, but you're also mourning what you didn't get as a child. So it's a very complex kind of experience.
That's a very interesting navigation. Yeah. And then Kenya also, her stuff with men, and she seems like she shows up to film. She may put a little bit of extras on it on occasion, but she's giving you something, and I just love to watch it. So it'll be interesting to see.
I just like complicated women. I think Sheree is like a really interesting, complicated person.
Yeah. Do you have a underrated housewife, somebody that is a little bit lesser known, but you feel like, hey, they have got a great story to tell?
I don't know. I think there's certain people, it's like I wish I had more to it. Like I feel like I want more to Candace. And I don't think it's her decision. I feel like it's production's decision. Like I would love to see more of her fertility journey. I think that's a really interesting, important story to tell. I don't really feel like I know who Adriana is. I don't know. Marisol, I still feel like I need some more. I want access to her professional life. I feel like it would make me understand her a lot more.
Well, she was the luxury PR. She had a luxury PR firm the first go around. Did you watch the original also?
Of course, but now where is she? Like, what is she doing off camera? We don't really see. We see glimpses of her house. We see glimpses of Steve, but what else? Who are the friends in her life? What is her week like? It seems like she's trying to tease us that she has this business that she's building, like with alcohol based, but I don't know enough. I need to know. I need to know a little bit more.
I would like more, but I'm also very okay with her being sort of like the Sonia Morgan character, where it's just a lot of goofy and fun. And then of course you miss her mom all the time as well. Yeah. But you're right. You should be producing the shows. So we'll move on. Thank you for your time. Do you have any other pop culture commentary that you wanted to speak about that excites you? Other than that, we are good to go. I just wanted to chat with you. I think it's very interesting, the dynamic between, like I said, reality TV, but then these really hard-hitting topics. But as you said, they're all the human story.
Listen, the person that watches a reality show also loves true crime. They like a sports docuseries. I mean, if someone's like, I don't like sports, I'll say, well, I'll challenge you. Watch 100-Foot Wave. Watch Untold on Netflix about untold stories of sports. It's the same fascinating thing that connects all of these shows. It's the personal story of resiliency, or the complicated way that we all think. That's the common thread. So I would encourage people to get my must-watch list every week, which is at katecasey.substack.com, because every Monday I'll tell you what to watch in unscripted television every week, and I'll give you in different genres. So I'm very confident that I'm going to open you to new experiences by giving you things that you wouldn't necessarily choose to watch each week.
Dang, you're doing all that for the audience? Jeez, I got to step it up, Kate. I'm over here just giggling and giving my good looks. But it is what it is. And you are right about that. My straight brother will watch Vanderpump because it is just human storytelling that's interesting. But every other, sports documentary, he will watch there's not one that goes by that he doesn't watch. But yet I'm like, because I can't get him into Housewives, but he will watch Vanderpump and on occasion a couple other shows. The Jersey Shore, let's say.
You need to watch Untold with him. Untold on Netflix. And the episode you need to watch, it's 2 episodes together. It's from the last season. It's about Manti Te'o. He was the Notre Dame football player. He was a big star. And then he got catfished. and people didn't believe him. They thought that he was gay and like keeping it secret, but he actually was catfished by someone. So they go back, 15 years later, and they interviewed the catfisher. And then they interviewed Manti Te'o, and you see how that experience totally ruined being a first-round pick for the NFL. He ended up being picked like much later down, farther down the list, which made him lose out on millions of dollars. But it's a redemption story for Manti Te'o because he's finally telling his side of the story. And then you get to see who the catfisher was. It's fascinating. So it's Untold. It's on Netflix, and you want to watch the Manti Te'o episodes. It's the girlfriend that never was.
I will watch it because that sounds fascinating. And one fun fact is when we grew up, the movie we watched all the time was Rudy. So you said Notre Dame.
Great movie. Yeah, great movie.
Yeah, what we did too?
If you liked Rudy, you're going to love this one.
My family, I grew up in a heavy sports household. That's why I'm always like, I was more like, where's Janet Jackson at? Where's the pop culture? But we grew up in such a sports family that not only do we love Rudy and watched it 10,000 times, but there was an orchestra that played the Rudy music. Like, it was the same composer. I don't think he's alive anymore. Not sure actually, but the composer who did Hoosier. So the music is really that great.
Yeah,
and so we went to downtown LA and we got to see, so what they'd air Rudy the movie on the screen, but there was an orchestra playing the music of Rudy. You talk about that, that Pecan Valley, that moment.
If you like Rudy, this episode is going to make you cry. And what you should know is that Manti Te'o, who had been basically laughed at and people were embarrassed by him because of this series and telling his story, he was reintroduced back to the Notre Dame community, and he went back for a game this season. And there was not a dry eye in the stadium. It was really special. And he was on the middle of the field with his wife and his daughter. And you can see it in him, just the relief that like, now you know who I am and what my truth was. And now he's like getting all these jobs out of it, is like commentating football games. It's like a fantastic redemption story.
I'll probably get back to you sooner than later because I may check it out with my brother today.
I think you should. I'm really confident that you are going to love it. Yeah.
Thanks so much for talking reality TV, the human experience, how it all intertwines. Kate, I'm real appreciative of you stepping out here and chatting it up a little.
Thank you.
Until the next time, the name of the podcast is Reality Life, and it's much more than a podcast, as you can tell.
Reality Life with Kate Casey.
Talk about it. Let them know. All right. We'll talk to you next time. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Hey, Ronnie Jr.